I'm Tammy Ven Dange, host for Executive with a Cause. And today on this show, I welcome Cindy Reese Mitchell. She's the founding CEO and now the Impact Officer, or Chief Impact Officer of Millhouse Ventures. She's also a PhD candidate in Indigenous Women's Entrepreneurship and Leadership, the founding director and chair of the Social Enterprise Council of ACT in New South Wales, the non-executive director of the Social Ventures Australia, and many, many, many other things. I could keep on rattling on forever. Welcome to the show, Cindy.
Thank you very much, Tammy.
We've known each other for a while.
We have.
I reckon it's at least a decade when you were over at the Lighthouse Ventures at the time. And that, too, was, kind of similar to Millhouse, but for profit.
Yeah, I've been rattling around in this economic development enterprise, microenterprise, social enterprise space for about 15 years. So most of my time since I've been in Australia, I've been doing this sort of economic development work.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, let's start with Millhouse because I think that that's a good foundation for when we talk about operations and the nuts and bolts of how to make things happen. You were the founding CEO of that organization. Tell us more about that.
Okay. The term founding CEO is a little bit of a misnomer, but yes, I am in fact the first CEO of Millhouse Ventures, but it's important to understand, I guess if you really want to understand operationally how this works, how it actually came together.
Yes.
So the Millhouse started as a consortium of the University of Canberra, Service One, who are a credit union that's part of the Bendigo Bank Alliance, and the Canberra Innovation Network in the ACT government. And so they came together and they were looking, and this is about 2015, and they were trying to understand how they could, I guess, more invest in this new thing called social enterprise. Of course, it wasn't new in 2015, but in terms of how our innovation ecosystem worked, there really wasn't any place for people who were like, well, yes, I want to do business, but I want to center purpose in this business. And I think this thing is called social enterprise, but I don't really know what it's called. Long story short, it actually started with the members of Service One because they are a social enterprise, being a member-owned credit union. So they approached the University of Canberra and said, hey, you're the region's university. You're supposed to do civic things. Help us do this civic thing, which is figure out how can we establish a social enterprise hub in Canberra. So at that point, Tammy, I was working in the public service. I had taken a break. I just finished starting my first social enterprise. It was an emotional roller coaster. I was basically licking my wounds in the public service. And I get this call out of nowhere. It says, hey, from a friend of mine who worked at the University of Canberra. And he says, so this bank wants to give us money to do this thing called social enterprise. I've never heard of it, but can you help? And of course, I nearly dropped the phone because that was my passion. And I had really struggled with getting the sort of support that I needed when I was on my social enterprise journey. So to make a long story short, I came in and basically started to draw this collaboration into this thing called the Social Enterprise Hub. And I immediately did what any good CEO does, which is not what I was asked to do. Because they were like, okay, we want to start this thing called the Social Enterprise Hub, and we think the best way to do that is if we find a building. And if we buy a building and we invest in, real estate and we set up a co-working space and I go, hang on a minute. What is the point of having a building if you don't have a community? Mm-hmm. If you haven't actually brought together people who are of a similar sort of purpose? And that was really the starting point for what would then become the Millhouse Ventures, which was, what is this? So how can we bring together a community of profit-for-purpose entrepreneurs, those who were interested in supporting them, those who were interested in working with them, those who were interested in investing with them, and that community is that became the mission of the Millhouse.
So you didn't buy a building?
We did not buy a building. And look, I think now it's 6 years in now. I think now we could buy a building, because we would fill it. We would actually, that could actually be a meaningful business model for the Millhouse. But before, it was also at a time when, every man and his dog was opening a co-working space in this town. And it was like, wait a minute, space is not the issue here. It's actually, how do we bring a community around these people? How do we center this work in a way that it is basically considered sort of basically a practical and a real way to intervene in the lives of people, because there were a lot of people, and still to this day, who are deeply suspicious of anything that has to do with purpose and profit and making money and business. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later. I won't get ahead.
I mean, let's go back a little bit to There's a lot of talk about social enterprises, and there's a lot of definitions about that as well. What do you use as a definition for a social enterprise?
Right. Really good question. And it is contested, like you said, and lots of different understandings of it. But first of all, social enterprises are businesses. So they are entities that trade in a product or a service, but the purpose of that business is to generate tangible, measurable, social, cultural, economic, or environmental impact. So they usually are two things. They are both a business, and they also are some type of usually social service intervention, or could be an environmental intervention, whereas the business is always secondary to that impact narrative is what we call it. So it's about how do we use business to sustain that. Now, in reality, in Australia and in the way our sort of ecosystem works, it is very rare for a social enterprise to be completely self-sustaining. These are usually hybrid organizations, so they have a combination of income from trade, but also from grants and philanthropy and other sources of income, because they're trying to constantly balance these two things. And the other thing where I often people are surprised, it's not a legal definition. So a social enterprise can be a for-profit. It can be a company limited by shares. It can also be a not-for-profit. It could also be a not-for-profit that is a charity. Social enterprise can work in any of those organizational forms.
And the underlying principle is basically that it does have a for-profit business model behind it, but that profit is being used to generate, or the purpose of the organization is being used to generate
that impact.
That impact.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's that sort of tangible connection between, the surpluses or the profits that are generated and this actual thing that the founders and whoever are developing the organization have a social license to operate.
Yeah.
So it's very much connected.
I've met a lot of what I think are social enterprise organizations. In fact, I have another interview later that they didn't see themselves as a social enterprise. But my definition was, to this particular founder, was that it is so loud, your mission is so loud to me that there's a social impact tied to it, that I can't help but think you're a social enterprise.
That's really interesting.
And it's only because that mission statement is so loud. It's not obviously to generate money for your pocket.
Yep. And look, it's a funny thing, Tammy, because I feel like the first year of Millhouse, it was just me, and all I did was drive around and tell people, "Hey, you're a social entrepreneur," and they went, "What?" Because they didn't necessarily have the language. So then you think, well, what's the purpose of this language? Particularly when I first started doing this, 10 years ago, there was just a lot of real, people who would not want to talk about mission and business in the same sentence. It was sort of automatically you're social washing, or, either questioning your intentions. And I think now, by having this community of people and growing community of people in Australia and globally using this term, it's like, no, we're for real. We are actually committed to using our businesses, which are, typically used to create wealth just for ourselves, but to create wealth for our communities.
Yeah. Do you think that there's a bit of social washing to that extent now? Like, I know Simon Sinek had a book talking about let's start with why. I forget if that's the correct title, but it's something close to
Something
that.
like that.
And now every business is trying to go back to the mission statement and making sure that why is loud enough where everybody understands it. But at the same respect, in the environmental space, we talk about greenwashing, where people will throw environmental benefits that necessarily don't exist. Do you see that happening as well?
Look, I'm not. I'm a realist. I live in the real world just like everyone else. I understand that there's a spectrum here, and that social enterprises and social entrepreneurs also don't have a corner on some sort of moral high ground or impact. Social enterprise is a very specific way, but look, my mission is to transform the nature of capitalism. So to have CEOs of Fortune 500 companies talking about impact, hey, that's further than they were 20 years ago or 30 years ago.
True.
So I'm not the one. I'm not. Maybe because I'm an optimist and I look for the best in people. When I see people starting to have those conversations, I lean in and I want to go, okay, great. How do we make you accountable for that?
Yeah.
So how do we make sure that it's more than just marketing? And then they'll let their intentions will then
be
come
obvious.
up. It'll be obvious, And it's like, okay, well, look, when you're ready to look at, here's what we do in social enterprise. We do put ourselves out on the line, and we do put ourselves out on the line for this impact. And we make what would otherwise be, pretty straightforward businesses really hard for ourselves because we're also trying to do this other thing. You might not be ready to do that right now, but when you are, here we are. We'd love for you to join this club.
Oh, yeah. I'm thinking about some companies that have been out there for a long time, like Patagonia. Certainly as a private company, they could do things that they can't do if they're a Fortune 500 trading company. Now, let's go back, though. I want to go all the way back down to Millhouse because I feel like if we don't talk about the nuts and bolts of that organization first. You started it with just yourself.
Yeah. So this consortium started it with this idea of a social enterprise hub for Canberra. I came along, and because I was its only employee, and was its only employee for really the first 2 years, I sort of got to mold, and I had just wonderful board. I had the best board in the world, and they gave me a lot of autonomy, and they really trusted me to go out into the community, understand what the need was, and then come back to them. And so basically where we arrived at the end of the first year was, okay, we've got this wonderful thing called the Canberra Innovation Network here, and they offer all sorts of programs and support, and they're able to take entrepreneurs on a journey. Can we do something like that for these for-purpose entrepreneurs? And I said, yeah. In fact, we can borrow some of that stuff. There's nothing about lean startup and that innovation stuff that we can't actually apply here. But we just need to do it. We just need to do it in a slightly different way because the people who are approaching social enterprise, they're typically not coming at it from a business perspective. So you kind of have to teach them the dark arts of capitalism in a way that is much more sort of comfortable for them. It takes them a little bit slower. Not that we have really clever people who are working with us, but it's about the why. It's always about putting it in the context of whose life are we trying to change? Okay, so in order to do that and sustain that, we got to make some money because nobody's going to give us enough money to do this.
Yeah.
So those are the two things.
So obviously you're constrained yourself by resources.
Absolutely.
And
me.
The Canberra Business Innovation Network is a sister organization per se. So how did you continue to grow the platform, I guess, the community? How did you do that with so few resources yourself?
The secret sauce was basically how can I infect as many other people in this community as possible with this understanding and appreciation for social entrepreneurship. So what do I mean by that? If you're a person who's trying to start out in business, there are a whole lot of people that you got to bounce up against. You probably will go meet other entrepreneurs. You'll go see an accountant. You'll see a lawyer. You might see a business advisor or a coach. I started bringing those people into my network and talking to them about social entrepreneurship and saying, you're an accountant. And I started meeting people. I'd go talk to accountants. One of my first partners that I work with is just down the street, Harry Hong. And it's like, I have a lot of these not-for-profit organizations in my portfolio I'm seeing as an accountant. Man, their businesses suck. I mean, they're like, what's going on with them? And I go, well, let me tell you about why their businesses are challenging. And so where I'm getting at is I started basically building a community who was then ready to receive these for-purpose traders in a different way, as opposed to where it had been previously, where a lot of times they would go to a mainstream business advisor, business enterprise center, the Canberra Innovation Network, and people were like, that's a dumb idea. You're never going to make any money on that. And it's like, but that's not the point. And they would be dismissed, and they would be, told that that's stupid, or go and make $1 million and then give back to charity like other philanthropists. And they're like, that's not how I want to do this business. So really, it was about building that group first. And so the secret sauce of Millhouse is really easy. We have a really small team of people who work with us at any given time. I've never had more than 5 employees, but we usually have every year between 40 and 60 mentors. So these are social impact investors, they're philanthropists, they're accountants, they're lawyers, they're business coaches, and we bring them into the family. And that's how it works.
And so they're all volunteers.
They're all volunteers.
Yeah. What a great concept to think that you could bring professionals from the outside to drive these missions that, especially with people that don't have business backgrounds. I suppose that's probably a lot of the people that you see.
Look, it is often if you look at the sort of social enterprise community, it is often people with the lived experience of the thing that they want to intervene in who say, wow, I've gone down this route with this charity, or I've gone down this route with this business, but I can see I want to do it differently. And so, yes, exactly. They often don't necessarily have a business background. So part of what we do at Millhouse is we try to shore up some of that. We try to put some stilts, and we try to put a little bit of foundation around them. And oftentimes it's not. I call it's a difference between sort of individual capability building and venture building. What we really decided early in the game is that we were going to be focused on venture building. And so when you take that orientation, someone comes to you and you go, well, I can't look at you and go, well, actually, Tammy, you really need to get an MBA, or actually, you really need to take a bookkeeping course. Mm-hmm. That's not it. It's saying, well, actually, these are the people that you need to build around you in order for this venture to be sustainable. And then you, with a full agency, you then decide if you're ready to build that venture or not.
Yeah. What are some examples of successful social entrepreneur type businesses that you've been helping along the way?
Look, there are lots, but I always like to talk about, I hope you get to interview him if you haven't already, Francis Owusu and Culture Break. Culture Break has been around in Canberra for 20 years. So they are on the surface, if you look at the business, they offer dance classes. So they do these in school, they do after-school programs. They also had a range of sort of leadership programs. But Culture Break has always been more than just dance classes. They really are creating opportunities for youth, and they found a really an interesting niche in that a lot of the young people who were attracted to their programs were those who had experienced bullying. Maybe they were from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, and really this experience, the idea that anybody, regardless of your natural talent, could be a dancer, and that you could be in these environments, like that was the secret sauce. And so when they came to Millhouse, it was like, okay, well, they're like any other charity. They're never going to be able to charge enough to cover their cost, right? Because it's an after-school program. You want to make it, or even some during school, so you want to make it as low cost, just put the barriers to entry, because you want to get that outcome around youth empowerment and leadership and growth. So then, it was always one year after another charity, philanthropy, trying to get a grant here, a grant there. And so when they came to Millhouse, they were in our very first class. And what we looked at is, okay, well, what is the unique value proposition here? What actually is happening? And we talked about the fact that many of these kids, by their experience in Culture Break, they were then looking at careers basically in the creative sector, doing art, doing design, doing film, doing media, doing graphics, doing dance teaching, doing other things. And it's like, you're actually creating a whole raft of pathways for young people that they wouldn't have otherwise had. And so then we looked at, well, that's actually a business. And that became what is now Elevate Academy, which is a project that they're going. I think they're probably in their third class now, and they're looking at becoming an RTO and partnering with unis. And so it's actually something that, that started quite small and needed to, and to the point where it's like, we actually have something that we can commercialize.
Yeah. So as part of the task of Millhouse is to identify where that business opportunity is?
Yeah. So it's about, it's always to start with the impact, right? So it's always, what do we want to do next? If I look at all of the success stories, it always starts with this is what we're doing right now. This is what our business can sustain right now in terms of, we're reinvesting half of our profits into this cause over here, or we're employing this many people with disabilities, and that's fantastic, but we want to employ even more. Or all the people who work with us right now on the north side of Canberra, and we have none on the south side of Canberra. How do you do that? So that becomes the call to action. And then it's, okay, well, what's the business? What thing can we sell or commercialize that's going to allow us to be able to, in the process, also achieve this outcome?
That's actually hard, though.
It's incredibly hard.
I'm just thinking about all the people that want to do good things and then trying to find a commercial model that makes that successful.
Yeah. And look, it's not always there. That's the other thing. It's like, well, it might be that you actually need to reevaluate where you want to have your impact. And yes, I know that on your mission statement on your website, it says that, that no child in Canberra goes to bed hungry. But if you look at your resources, if you look at the income that you're able to generate, you might only be able to do that for half of Charnwood. So let's just be realistic. Let's just say it's about Charnwood and be really focused on that. There's nothing wrong with Charnwood, like being focused on that community. But let's scale our impact, and let's not be let's not be, over claiming by saying, well, we exist to help all children in Canberra when in fact you only generated $100,000 in income last year. Like that's not the problem versus what you were able to do in terms of your resources. They don't match up. So sometimes it's as much, yes, we do lots of business work, but oftentimes it's also looking at, well, what impact do you actually can actually be attributed to you?
Yeah.
And that's that ability to be able to evaluate the difference that you make. That's actually the really key difference in terms of what we do in the social enterprise sector.
So let's go back to that and look at Millhouse specifically. How do you measure success with Millhouse?
So that's an interesting thing, and it's one that we always challenge because we are an intermediary. So I can't claim Culture Break's impact, like in the sense of that, because they do that. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, this is always a challenge because to be a successful intermediary, you're actually invisible, which makes it really hard when you're trying to make a proposition to funders about, well, actually, we do all this stuff in the background. We make connections and we help people look at their business models and we introduce them to impact partners that they might not have otherwise have been able to be introduced to. So it's those sorts of things that we have after it took us years, but we have developed a monitoring evaluation sort of framework for the Millhouse. And now in my various roles, I've had a chance to speak with other social enterprise intermediaries in other parts of the world, and we're all looking at the same things. It's how many mentors we have. It's how many referrals to professional service providers. It's absolutely the stories of our ventures and the feedback that they give us as founders about our role. And usually you do that over time, so you might get something. You might get one view of Millhouse at the end of an intensive amount of work. So let's say someone's just gone through the accelerator program. You might get one version, and then we'll go back to them maybe 6 months later and a year later, and then you'll get, they're like, wow, now we understand. Now we get it, what your role was in terms of this. And so I love it when I feel like, the last 6 years, I've just built this incredible family that I'm so proud of. And I love it when I go to a website of one of our ventures and they still have a little thank you to Millhouse. Or, it's like, it's been 6 years since you were in our program and yet you still talk, but there's I guess now, because we've had, a few alumni who've gone through, there is this pride that they took that time to invest in their own capacity and they recognize that they are now leaders in this space and other people are looking to them at how do you do this?
And so with that in mind, has your funding changed over time?
No, it's been really tiny the whole time.
Yeah.
So we started with this social enterprise hub. And then this community, and that's really where we are at, 5 years in, and we've actually, not to spill the beans of sort of internal machinations, but we've had to have, as a board, we've had this real, okay, where do we can do lots of stuff. We can just keep getting bigger and bigger. This community keeps getting bigger, but our resource pot is finite. And so we've, at this stage, we've been really fortunate. The Snow Foundation has just come on with us this year now for the next 3 years. And that was really, for me, that was really critical to have, one of Canberra Region's most important social impact investors now really recognizing our role as a capability builder. We've worked many years now with Hands Across Canberra in a similar way. So, and now I think the discussions now are, okay, well, is it now time for us to look at our founding membership and maybe there's some additional organizations that might want to come on board now that they can see what we've done over the last 5 years. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens simply because, this work is only getting bigger.
Yeah.
We need to get more money.
Well, do you see Millhouse having a different commercial model? I mean, right now you're heavily dependent on third parties.
Yeah, and look, that's if you look at other social enterprise intermediaries, that's always the thing. It's like, well, now you got to take your own medicine. Like, where's your sustainable business model? Like, we can't charge people the cost of our programs. Intermediaries who've tried that in the past they're no longer in business. So over the years, certainly we have looked at opportunities where, I thought that our skills as a board, as a founding group of members and sort of my skills as a CEO, where I could, get in there. But these things are, and this is any intermediary out there will understand, like this is challenging because it's risk. Yeah. So you think, okay, well, we have a model. And we can work within that. But if we take on a commercial, if we buy a building and we lease it, or if we buy a business and we run it, or if we do something else, that's a risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your
But
costs go up.
certainly we have, and my members are a bank at a university, so there's different tolerance levels for risk.
And you're currently located at the university?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think it is interesting because if you look at the similar model for more or less incubators, I know you're saying intermediary, but it's really an incubator.
Yes, they are types of intermediaries as well.
And if you look at that type of a model for-profit, the usual model is, well, we'll get you to a point and then we may invest in you. And then that's where they get their revenue their investments to regenerate. You're not doing any kind of ownership arrangement.
We did do, in our first year was the only year we did equity investments. And that was, it was challenging because, again, I was the only employee at that time. So I was raising money and running the deal, doing the deal flow and preparing them. And so it was like, but certainly that model exists. I think certainly if someone gave me, $100 million and they said they wanted me to do investment in social enterprise, like we no, probably not $100 million, but like we could do that. That's another, I guess, another business model for intermediaries like us. Certainly that's what we did at Epicorp, which was my first job in this space a million years ago. We ran an investment fund. We took management fees on that investment fund. We invested, and then we took fees from, commercial activities that we supported with the things that we invested in. So that's a very well sort of, traversed model. I think the challenge is we are still you got to have social enterprises that are ready for investment.
Yeah.
And that takes time for them to get that big. And because of the nature of their business models, we probably have in Australia a handful that are not asset-backed. So certainly the asset-backed ones, if you want to buy a building or if you want, that money is out there. That's really not the space where there's a lot of need.
Yeah. And as you say, asset-backed for people that may not be familiar with that term. Basically, it's physical assets that they can sell.
If we want to build houses for people with disability, or or homelessness, or that, those sorts of things, there's plenty of money, because that's what's happened in terms of mainstream venture capital and private equity has gotten to the impact, right? So that's the sort of work we do. I do that sort of work at SVA, but at this very early stage, it's still. You're basically making grants and hopes in these really early stage organizations, and then once they get to that next stage where they're trading, they do have a business model, then the founders they're not really that interested in equity because then obviously that sort of implies that they're thinking about an exit. That's the next thing. It's like, well, that's not what we're trying to do here.
Right.
So then they might be better suited to more like debt instruments. And if I'm making sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I also can think about people that want to make impact don't realize they're buying themselves a job.
Yeah.
And soon that becomes a reality of what you have to do to achieve that may not be what they want to do for a living too.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing about funding is that, just through your incubator program, the idea that you sometimes would probably have to convince people they need to make money.
Probably, it's a funny thing. We do a lot of weeding. So, by the time they get into our program, they understand what social enterprise is. They're committed to it because a lot of what we do in the short time that we typically have, so we might be working intensely with a client for between 3 and 6 months. And usually we're doing a proof of concept. We're doing some sort of market validation activity. So we are talking to real human beings. We have to get out of the building. Got to do all that stuff. So it's really more on the early end where I do lots. My favorite thing to do is we have a program called Introduction to Community Social Enterprise. And I love doing those all over the region. And I go to on a Saturday morning in public libraries and I put on tea and biscuits and I just invite people who want to have impact. And I say, and it's, what do you want to do? And that's usually where I have you mean I can't just get a grant?
Yeah.
They thought they were going to come and I was going to tell them, oh, that's fantastic. You will be able to get a grant to do that. And I go, well, you might be able to get a grant to try that. But then how are you going to sustain it? And they go, oh, man, that's too hard.
Yeah,
that is that is the reality of the for-purpose sector at this moment. There is, all that money is just much more contested. There's a lot of competition for money. I see people every day with ideas and I go, well, did you know that there are like 5 organizations that are already funded in Canberra to do that, and they're already strapped for cash and they're competing against each other? Like, go volunteer or go work for one of them. Like, that's part of sometimes what I have to tell people as well.
Yeah, I imagine so. Now, when you're talking about your network of people that you bring in to help these people, and if you were a young social entrepreneur, from an organizational point of view, not from an age perspective, trying to build something, what are the key resources that they need to get around them to support them?
Look, the main things, it depends on what they bring. So it's always about complementarity. So in social enterprise, you are doing 2 things, and you're basically trying to sustain impact. And you're working with real people, so the way that you sustain impact at the beginning of your journey might not be the way you do it at the end. And then you're also trying to run a business. And one of the things that I've observed over many years now is that some of the best social enterprises have 2 founders. So you actually have 2 people who are because it's just really hard for one person to do both of those things. So if you have 2 people who are, of equal stature working together, and one's really focused on the business and how we're going to make money, and the other one's really focused on working with people and understanding what that impact narrative is, then that works. But in reality, I hardly ever get 2 people. So I'm always faced with one of those things or some interesting combination of one of those things. So then what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to actually figure out, well, how can I complement that?
Yeah. Yeah, so you need someone who has stronger financial skills, or you have someone that has more of a operation acumen.
Yeah. And I found, particularly, it's an interesting thing because I've been at this 6 years with Millhouse, and I found in the early years it was always, wow, it was like these fantastic community development workers or people, volunteers in organizations, and our fantastic retirees in this community who have so much knowledge, and they'll be, and then you go, gee, this is perfect. I just need an entrepreneur to work with you, and then this would be, and now 6 years in, I meet it's the business people, and I have to go, wow, you are an excellent operator. You run that cafe, you run that consultancy business, but you say you want to help people who are homeless, but you've never been homeless. You don't know anybody.
Yeah.
So like I've got to find an impact partner to ground you. And it's interesting that over the time I've had this sort of shift where now it's almost like if I look at my clients, it's more mainstream entrepreneurs who are saying, gosh, something's on my heart around impact. I have no idea where to start. And I go, okay, well, first thing we do is we need to find an impact partner for you.
Yeah. So are you playing matchmaker more?
Yeah. And look, I think that's always what I've been doing, but now that I have it's harder to find an entrepreneur than it is to find an impact partner.
Okay, interesting.
So now that I'm at that point, it's more like, okay, well, now we need to find one that has a model. We have to find one that's even willing to talk to an entrepreneur, because there are lots of people in the for-purpose sector who are still, I've already said this, really, it's almost like a prejudice. It's like, oh, what do you're making money. You couldn't possibly understand our sector. You couldn't possibly, be able to do what we do. And so, sometimes I have to make sure that I try to match people up who are not going to then throw water on this person, because I really do want to stoke that fire. I want them to. I don't even care if it becomes a social enterprise. I want them to be passionate about impact, because I think it's going to make them a better business person.
Yeah. So when you started your, let's just say you started Millhouse, you started No Sweat Fashions as well, and we haven't talked about that one much, but you've obviously had some experience not only with your own organization as well as others. Let's just talk about basics. The kind of things that you need to set up a business, or in this case, social entrepreneur, enterprise type business. What do you need to get in place just to get going? So you have your impact, you have an idea for how to make money, but there's some nuts and bolts along the way that you got to get in place just to make this work. What are the things that you would advise?
Yeah, look, the biggest thing you need is a customer. So, and that's what we work on. It's like, okay, well, what problem are you trying to solve? And I love it when people go, oh, my market is anyone, or it's like, no, it is not. It is someone very, very specific. It is a 45-year-old woman who's this educated at this level, it's actually doing that next stage with them, and then figuring out, okay, well, if this is your target customer, how are we going to validate that? So a lot of what we do at Millhouse is proof of concept. It's basically saying, okay, well, who can we approach to do a trial, or who can we approach to do a focus group, or who is willing to be your first, who's willing to try this thing out? So it's, a customer.
Yeah. And then for basic operations in the background, I think there's too many people that probably start with this kind of stuff, which is, oh, I need a website. Oh, I need a business card. No,
I hate that. Like I get it, and I know that is a discipline, but it's also a business, So I always think that, and it's probably because I started my career working with technologists. So I would work with, I did research commercialization. So, and I'd go, marketing is the thing you do before you write the first line of code. And they'd go, what? No, we build it, we make it perfect, and then we take it to customers. They're like, no, that's not how it works. We find out what the problem is, we find out how we can solve it, and then we build it. And whatever we need to show them in the meantime, whatever sort of puppetry or wizardry or, fake thing we need to put out there to be able to validate it, and then we go and build it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's good advice even for a established organization that is thinking about adding something new, right?
Yeah.
Like that oftentimes is the case where they're like, well, we need a slogan, we need a brand, a sub-brand for this, and they go out and get all that stuff done before they've even tested the market.
Yeah. And then, the added side is you're doing this for purpose. So, nothing about us without us. Like, you also have to talk to the people that you're trying to help. Like, you also have to engage those people with lived experience, to understand, well, yes, you have this really great idea about how you want to support people with disabilities, but is this a really not a good place to work? Is it cold? Does it have too many steps? Like, there's a lot of really tangible things that oftentimes people sort of forget about in terms of actually the area of impact that they want to have, because they just have this idea in their mind. They want to make a difference, and they don't understand that is as much, and I've learned this from hard experience, that is as much of an experiment as the business side, because people don't always want to be helped in the way that you want to help them. Just because you've come up with this idea about how you want to support people, or how you want to improve the environment, or how you want to, doesn't mean that that's valid. There's actually a validation process that has to go on that side as well. And it's really difficult to hold those two things because they're in tension. They're always fighting against each other.
Is there a sweet spot?
Look, I think if you talk to social entrepreneurs, they are people who are very comfortable with ambiguity. They are people who are very values-driven. They have usually built structures around them. So I'm talking about boards of directors and advisors, and groups with people with lived experience on this. So they've built structures around them to help keep them accountable. That's really the only thing you can do, because when you're in it, and I've been in it, and I've seen people in it, you're just being pulled back and forth all the time.
Yeah.
So the only thing you can do, and I think that's probably part of the reason why we stay connected to Millhouse graduates for so many years. It's like Hotel California; they never leave because they come back, particularly those who maybe haven't formed some of those structures, is they actually come back and they just want to sit across from us, and we go, okay, what's happening over here? What's happening over here? Like, let's talk about it, because they don't have that in their day-to-day.
Yeah, just the feedback loop.
Yeah.
Are you seeing trends as far as the type of social impact projects or enterprises that are being started right now compared to before, maybe even COVID?
Probably two areas, and some of this might just be kind of where my own kind of thinking and work is going. But the one thing, work integration social enterprise. So that was my first one. So these are businesses that exist to create transitional employment opportunities for people who experience barriers to mainstream labor market participation. So we saw during COVID that all that COVID basically exacerbated. So if you already had these pre-existing vulnerabilities and challenges, once we got to that situation with the pandemic, that just made it worse.
Yeah.
And so I think certainly what I saw was even more mainstream businesses saying, wow, I'm looking around and it's people who are already doing it tough are doing it even more tough. So what can I do? And so creating that's where there's a lot of work. I think the other area, and this probably is a reflection of my research interests and sort of where I'm going, is Indigenous entrepreneurship. So that's huge. But also where I work, because I'm not an Australian Indigenous person, so I work in that nexus because I want to be an ally, and I increasingly see other non-Indigenous impact practitioners kind of approach this interface of reconciliation saying, what can we do together? How can I work with you? Whereas previously, for so many years, people have gone into Indigenous communities, they've taken artwork, they've taken bush foods, they've taken medicines, they've taken ideas, concepts, language, and commercialized it. And so now, that's just not on anymore. Like that will, if you try to do that out there, like that will get called out so quickly, and you will be so attacked, in terms of reputational damage. But that doesn't mean that doesn't mean that non-Indigenous people and Indigenous people can't venture together. In fact, I personally think that is the ripest area for reconciliation in this country right now. But that's probably another podcast. But that's probably that's that area where people are like, how do I, and I have these conversations. People are like, how do I decolonize what I do? And I'm like, I love that word. You probably don't know what it means, but let's talk about it. What does that mean to you? And what does that look like?
Well, I think it's a great opportunity now to talk about how you've moved away from Millhouse. You've just let go of that CEO hat. Yep. You're now the Chief Impact Officer.
Yeah.
What are your intentions? You're obviously on a lot of boards that are very similar in terms of mission, but in different locations, perhaps. And what's your plans with this PhD too? Because I think you need to dive into it a little bit further to really explain what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And look, my PhD, I'm a PhD student at Swinburne University of Technology in the Center for Social Impact, and my PhD is on Kimberley Indigenous women's leadership and entrepreneurship. So, and I'm part of a collaboration. So, throughout the world, globally, microenterprise has been a key development logic. So it's the idea that you look at these communities and if you want to empower, we all know that if you want to empower a community, investing in women is how to do it because you get exponential benefits. Investing in a woman, you then it's intergenerational benefits of investing in women. So then there's a lot of focus, there's a little bit of backstory and I'll get there. So the whole idea is, okay, well, if we change the way that women produce, because typically women produce in households, if we actually get them involved in market activity, that will be a way to be able to get communities out of poverty. So just think that's a development logic.
Okay, wait. So we got to say produce, and we're talking about producing goods and services.
Goods and services.
Yes,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
There you go.
So that logic is now increasingly being applied to the gap, right? This thing that we talk about in Australia about this persistent difference in terms of Aboriginal sort of living conditions, particularly those who live in rural and remote regions, and mainstream Australians. Like, basically, there are parts of our country that are like third world countries or the global south. And so that many people are now looking to the global south, looking to these development things that were happening in Fiji or Cambodia or Indonesia and saying, maybe there's something we can learn here. So that is the genesis for this project that's happening in the Kimberley. So there's a philanthropist, there's a social impact intermediary, and I'm part of the team as the embedded researcher. And so what this journey has been for me is really looking at, okay, this is looking at basically Indigenous economic development, and that's what I think that's where I'm going. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, but this project has just been amazing in terms of the insights, in terms of how Indigenous Australians, First Australians have always ventured. And yet we in the last 150 years, we came in and we dispossessed them of their languages and the way that they ventured, their connections to country. We took their children. Like, there's a whole range of things that have challenged their ability to get their heads around the way business works now. And so if you want to go into communities and you want to say, well, micro business is going to be a way for you to get out of poverty, a way to close the gap. You got to understand how they do it. You can't impose my idea of what business is, and that's what we've always done.
Yeah.
So then you wonder, okay, well, we've been putting all these, all this money into, indigenous business investment, and why isn't it working? What's wrong with these people? Well, that's always the thing. What's wrong with these? Like, no, what's wrong with your logic? What's wrong with this thing that you've imposed? And so part of what my research is really about is sitting back and just trying to understand and listen and observe what is different. And one of the main things that we've learned is that how First Nations communities, and not just Australian, but globally, but particularly in the context that I'm working in, wealth means different things.
Yeah.
And so, if you understand that, then how they venture is going to be different.
Yeah.
And then the sorts of support that they need from these organizations, from these intermediaries, it has to be different as well.
Oh, gosh, isn't that interesting? Because, when we talk about providing a service through your operations, it is kind of well, I know what they need. It's obvious.
Yep.
Right? It's kind of obvious that they don't have what I have, and therefore that's what they need. And therefore, all I got to do is find a way to provide that to them.
Wrong answer.
Yeah, okay.
That's what I mean. And look, it's so much of what we have learned, and it's amazing. It's the heroes to me are like the anthropologists, the people who've been out there, and they said this, and they come back and they go, but do you understand that when you tell this woman that the only way she can have a business is if she sets up a separate bank account to her family and puts the money over here and she treats it in this way. Well, that's not how it works. That's not how wealth moves in her family. That's not how and you're actually, by imposing that logic, you're actually causing more trauma, stress, which is then going to have an impact on her ability to achieve her business outcomes.
Yeah, and yet good accounting practices, the tax laws and such require you to have a separate bank account. So how do you get around that?
Yep.
Yeah, gosh, some different challenges.
But look, it's really been amazing to sort of think about, and I think that's the whole thing. It's like, well, why does it have to be like that? It's like, okay, well, who said?
Yeah.
and why? And what happens when people have been, just constantly dispossessed in their way, their knowledge, their connections, that have been told that that's not important. And yet at the same time, there is lots of money to be made in the Kimberley. You know what I'm saying? Like that, and lots of money that is being made on the backs of the Indigenous people. And resources that have been extracted, all the tourism, all of the knowledge, and yet who's not benefiting from it? So, yeah.
I think this is probably a good point just to try to apply it to other organizations that are obviously with different missions and different goals. But the reality is that every once in a while, if you don't do it already, you need to step back and just look at your impact and see if you're actually achieving it. And if not, why not, right?
Yeah. And look, it's a tough thing because you think. And when I talk to social entrepreneurs, we talk about what we do as being transitory, like 3 to 5 year business models, like because we don't want to invest in the long term in this problem. We're trying to solve the problem. We're trying to change the narrative. We want to then look at how we might need to adapt this organization to address a new challenge. But that's difficult and sort of mainstream. Not to have a go at our not-for-profit sector of friends. That's really important. But sometimes there's an when you have that sort of institutionalization, you have this sort of locked in of the problem and how we solve the problem. And actually, they don't want that problem to be over because then their livelihood is over, and they express that in ways that, it's sometimes counterproductive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think 3 to 5 year horizon is because if you want to achieve anything, that's always been kind of the corporate way of doing things, isn't it? And even government. I've seen a lot of governance and other policies and procedures that have been brought through into not-for-profits and charities that have come from government and corporate that don't work at all. And yet they use them because they think that that's how you do it. So examples would be a procedural document that looks like it was written in ISO 9000 standards that no individual who is working there or as a volunteer would actually recognize and understand. From your experience, of all the work that you've done with so many different social enterprises and not-for-profits for that matter, what are some common themes that you would, I suppose, see for the good ones, for the ones that are actually making that impact and are still financially sustainable and are continuing? What are the common things that they're doing right?
They have good structures. So, and what I mean by that is, they've actually got paid full-time managers at different levels of the organization. They've also got boards. So they've actually built that sort of accountability and governance layers. They are also committed to communicating. So what I mean by that is, everybody talks about, oh, well, you need to do an annual report or you got to do this thing every year to ASIC. No, you actually need to talk to your community in a way that they will understand about your impact and about whether you, and how you have been successful in that. And when I look at social enterprises, some of them are even to the point where they have formal research relationships where they're regularly having people come in and from the outside. They might be working with a PhD student or a master's student who's publishing insights, and there's data that's freely available and contested about and people can look at peer-reviewed things about, well, how are they working and how do they partner and how have they structured this. I think the other things is being really the structure is whatever structure it needs to be to accomplish your impact. So again, in Australia, where we don't have a for-profit, a for-purpose, legal entity, I've seen lots of really interesting. Those ones who are really doing, I think they're doing really exceptional things. They have sort of cobbled things together so that you might. And what I mean by that is they might have a not-for-profit, a company limited by guarantee, but they might also have a company limited by shares, and they've got good impact investors and patient impact investors in there who are committed to their mission, and so they've done. But basically, I think if it come down to the themes, it's really around when you run a business. It can be very insular. It's basically you, and I think the thing about social entrepreneurs is you're putting a bit of it out. It's like taking a little bit of your heart and you're kind of putting it out there and you're saying, who's with me? Like, who else is willing to be accountable for this thing along? And yes, in the meantime, you still have all the financial things and you still people got to get paid and those sorts of things. But there's this level of and a willingness to embed that enterprise in a place and in a community. When I see that happening, I know they're in for the long run. Because
it's not about themselves anymore.
It's not about themselves. It's about you're almost creating a public asset, and you're regularly inviting people with lived experience and traditional custodians and professional service providers to be engaged and to have a say in how this thing operates.
Yeah, I would not have guessed that was what you're going to say, but it makes a lot of sense. It really does, because, like you say, that somebody who wants to start an organization, especially, someone who's an entrepreneur who's thinking about doing social change, they are leaving a part of their hearts there. And the minute that they decide it's not just their heart, it's others, that's when it becomes a community mission.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Would not have seen that. I know we're just about out of time, Cindy, so I just wanted to wrap up with a couple more questions. What are some of the resources that you use to become a better executive, social entrepreneur yourself, and your other goals? What are some, it could be podcasts or books or websites. What resources would you find useful that maybe somebody else might too?
This is the part where I'm going to let you down because I don't have like a whole list of great business books or podcasts, because I think for me, because this is not just a job, it's a vocation and a mission, and I'm embedded in it all the time. So like when I'm not at work, it's just not anything. I love true crime, so Australian true crime podcast, which of course has nothing to do. But look, it's for me, it's having the ability to turn off, and I think the biggest recently, I think for me, has been the boards that I've joined. And being able to find people who are further along, who are mature. Like, I think for a long time, I kind of was feeling a little bit stuck in that, like, I've been doing this a long time. I'm considered an expert in social enterprise. Well, I don't always want to be the smartest person in the room. Like, and so I figured out that I just needed to find different rooms to be in. And I think particularly over the last year and why I'm doing, for instance, the PhD study, and I've, joined a few boards, I've just recently put myself in some different rooms. And I feel really excited, and I feel like it's like a new lease on even, my professional work. The work that I do day to day hasn't changed, but my perspectives have changed because I get to spend time with people who are looking at it from different, ways. And that was really just kind of getting over the, am I going to be good enough? Or what if they don't like me? Like, actually putting my hand up for things and being willing to do that.
Love that. Love that advice that it's actually people and not some, most people would think about books and other things, but you're actually looking for individuals to spend time with.
Yeah.
And I love that's how you've approached that. If people wanted to know more about some of the projects and things that you're working on, I know that's evolving as we speak, where's the best place for them to go?
Well, I guess for me, I love LinkedIn, so that tends to be kind of my public space where I share all the different aspects. So be it my either study or professional work, or even the non-executive director stuff that I do, or community stuff that I do. Just reach out to me there.
Okay, great. Cindy, thank you for all you do. Whenever we have these conversations, both privately and even what we've done today, I feel like my brain is about to explode.
That's me all the time.
Just because there's so much information in what you say, and also just because you look at things so differently. I think people think that there's this not-for-profit piece and charity piece, and then you have for-profit, and there's nothing in between. And yet you look at it so differently.
A spectrum.
Yeah. It's evolving from, definitely various shades of color that can impact the community in a totally different way, and the way that you look at investment into social enterprise and the things you're thinking about for the future in particular can really, really change generations. And, I look forward to seeing what you do with that, and just, thank you for the work you do.
Oh, thank you very much, Tammy. I appreciate it.
Hi, this is Tammy again. When I'm not doing podcasts, I'm actually helping not-for-profits with their IT decisions. Now, for this segment we have in IT in plain English, I have a question that asks, what's the one affordable thing we can do that will dramatically increase our cybersecurity? Now, this is a hot topic these days, as you can imagine, but one of the cheapest things that you can do is actually regular training for your staff. There's some research out there that says that somewhere between 74 to 88% of all cybersecurity breaches is actually caused by an employee's mistake or negligence. So even though it sounds easy, don't underestimate that particular opportunity to decrease your cybersecurity by just basic investment in your team's training. Now, on another note, if you're already doing that, the other thing that you need to do is go ahead and look and see if your devices, your PCs and laptops, are actually still being supported by the provider. Most of them are probably Microsoft, so I'm going to speak specifically for Microsoft operating systems. If you have an IT person, whether it's internal or external, then it's really good for them to go ahead and do an audit on an annual basis if you don't already have an asset management register somewhere to make sure that everything's being supported by Microsoft. So as of January 2023, as an example, anything that's on Windows 8.1 will actually no longer be supported from a security perspective. So rather than waiting until then, it's a good time to start looking at it now and get it into your budgets, because this is something that has to be done if you want to keep your organization's data safe. Same thing with servers. If you have your own servers, I would get your IT person to identify them all and find out if those are still being supported. It's not uncommon for me to go into organizations and find desktops and laptops as well as servers that haven't been supported by the vendor in a very long time. So this is one of the easiest ways for them to get into your organization through a backdoor of a known security issue. So I highly recommend you go ahead and do that. Just get a hold of your IT person to help you out. So I hope in plain English that was one easy way, except it was two easy ways to go ahead and help yourself from a cybersecurity perspective. If you have an IT question and you want to send it to me, then feel free to contact me on LinkedIn, send me a message, and I just might answer your question on the show. And of course, if you like the show and liked what you hear, then please go ahead and subscribe to this page. Make sure you leave us a review when you have a chance. And for those of you who are executives with a cause, I just wanted to say thank you for the work that you do. You and your teams are actually making a huge difference to this world, and we know that. So thank you, and keep doing that.